for is that we are recording this session so that we will edit the good bits and share it with you and others later. And so, well, it's listing there who we are: Tom, Bragg, Nicholas, Harry, Margaret, Reynolds. And so I'm mentioning at the top, this is the first in this year's Open Eco Homes events. This was going to be a live event, and now it's a virtual one for obvious reasons. And Open Eco Homes is a project of the charity Cambridge Carbon Footprint. So that's who we're about. This particular presentation was delivered by Carbon Co-op in Cambridge last September, and so we adapted what they did then, but this is the Cambridge version. Okay, thanks, Nicola. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, and so here is the summary of what you're going to have in this session this evening. Fairly soon, we're going to run a poll to find out a bit more about what you're interested in. And then Nicola's going to present about the context of retrofit for a while. Then we'll have a question and answer session. So you can be writing your questions in chat. And I'll have a poll. And then Margaret is going to actually talk about getting started on retrofit. Another question and answer. So we're planning to finish by 9. Okay, and you see in this picture, there's been some nice retrofit internal wall insulation down there. Anyway, yes, next please. And so, okay, so we're gonna, in a minute or two, I shall launch the first poll, and then the screen will change and you'll be asked a couple of questions. So please, can you tick the answers? I'll give you a minute to tick the right answer, tick your answers, and then we can share the summary, the sort of statistics of what was most popular. So here we go. You've got a poll now, so I'll give you a minute to click on those. And hopefully we're going to see the results. Yep, I can see people are clicking away. That's good.
Do you want to describe, Tom, what's going on in the picture here on the slide?
Well, at the moment, most people, 3/4 are saying, I have some knowledge about retrofit.
No, I'm saying what is on the slide? Is this
I'm with you. Yeah, that's correct. Sorry, yes. In the photo at the bottom of this slide, it is indeed hempcrete insulation being poured behind that shuttering. And this was part of an Open Eco Home on Fodé Street in Cambridge, Alex's house. But there was also a workshop on how to do hempcrete. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling now, and I think I will be able to share this with you, so you can now, I hope, can you see the results?
Yeah.
And so of the, which best describes you, we wanted to know a bit about your knowledge, and that's good. Most of you know a bit about this. I'm afraid the people who it's completely new to, you may need to catch up with us. And I hope those who know a lot will get something out of this. And interestingly, or I find it interesting, the most popular house type that people have got or thinking of retrofitting are in the sort of 1960 to 1990 bracket. But there are 14% who have got pre-1900 ones. So, okay.
Very interesting.
So I'm going to close that one. Can we go to the next slide? I think it's probably over to you, Nicola. Okay, yes. So now Nicola's going to tell us about retrofitting context.
Tom has challenged me to do this in 25 minutes, and it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So I'm going to flip through things, and my main intent is for you to understand the kind of things that you need to consider and why it's important to plan things. So it's going to be quite quick. I hope that's okay. So retrofitting context. We're always retrofitting our houses for one reason or another, because we want to change the layout, or because, I don't know, lots of reasons. But this, in particular, we're interested here in for climate change, which may be part of another retrofit. It's just another aim. We may want to be more comfortable, we may want to reduce our bills, all sorts of things. It's important for climate change because most of us use fossil fuels to heat our homes at the moment, and that contributes to carbon emissions. You may be surprised that if, you know, in terms of gas, most people use gas. The heating our homes and cooking accounts for 60% of all the natural gas consumption in the UK as gas. That doesn't include power stations, but power stations are using less gas anyway as we use more renewables. So that will kind of take care of itself, hopefully, in time. But we have to deal with our own houses or do something about that. So a very significant part of gas consumption, and also some of oil and other things, is for heating, and that's what we're looking at today.
We both had a notion of having a farmhouse kitchen, but we had different perspectives on it.
We've always been interested in doing things that in an energy efficient way, haven't we? Yeah. And the place just sort of seemed like the kitchen because it's where most needed doing up.
Yes, I think that our lifestyle has changed very significantly because we now have not only a nice kitchen for ourselves, but it's a very welcoming place for guests. That works together with your baking activity, so that we have a social event almost every week, and the kitchen is ideal for us. The original kitchen had a solid floor, but that actually means a thin skin of cement, and underneath just soil. It's 120 millimetres of insulation underneath a concrete slab, which then has an underfloor heating system in it, involving circulation of warm water.
It's a really cosy place to be in the winter. Well, for the first time in this house, I think I could truly say my feet are warm. And it also works brilliantly because of running half the kitchen as a bakery one day a week. It helps the bread to rise. You know, it's a constant heat. And I really like that.
So our hot water for the whole house is generated from solar panels during the summer. And this works by drawing down hot water using a pump to a thermal store, which is up here. The water comes down to a silvery insulated pipe, enters the bottom of the store, which is just a large tank of hot water, 200 litres. And then water is drawn off from this to heat the kitchen floor. And it also provides us with our domestic water for showering and so on. I believe that we can reduce carbon emissions by a factor of 3.
I definitely recommend eco-renovation to others because it's really improved my quality of life. I love knowing that the heat in the floor comes from the sun's effect on the panels on the front of the house. And feeling warm in here about having a shower because we know the water's coming from the solar panels, usually the heat of the water. I think about that every time I have a shower. I think, great, this water's heated by the sun.
Eco-renovation is virtually a way of life. I couldn't imagine doing anything else when you're experiencing the end result. As you say, knowing where the energy is coming from, and knowing that you're only a small amount of energy, yes. Then it's really, really satisfying.
Okay, I hope you could all hear that successfully. Was that all right? Somebody tell me they could hear it? Oh.
Yes, it was fine. Excellent.
Good. Okay.
It was fine, Nicola.
Peter and Meg did a lot of stuff on their kitchen, And it involved 3 separate elements. It involved insulation and heating system upgrade. In their case, they did the underfloor heating. It involved renewable energy. And in their case, it was hot water panels. And those are 3 really important elements that we normally have to, consider. You should be considering all of those 3 when you're considering your low carbon retrofit. And also ventilation. It doesn't necessarily affect everybody, but most people either have too many drafts, which is a wasteful, or if you cut down on the drafts, you need to worry about actually having the right amount of ventilation. So we'll look at that again later. Peter and Meg were just doing a part of their house at the time, and it's actually part of a longer term retrofit. Later on, they put in more insulation and other things. It really isn't necessary to think about doing everything all at once. In fact, it's usually quite impractical to do everything all at once. But it is really helpful to have a plan so that you know what you're trying to achieve, how you're going to do it, and what is the best order to do it in. Because if you do it in the wrong order, you can find yourself undoing things or doing things unnecessarily that you didn't really need to do at all. So for example, if you're going to put in external or any insulation and windows, if you're placing your windows, you'll probably find you need to redo bits of the insulation around the windows. So it makes sense to do the windows first and then do the insulation. And if you not the other way round, and that's the kind of thing that can cause a problem. So planning is really very important. And now we're going to look at some of the things that you can do. So internal insulation is something that is very dear to my heart because I live in a solid wall house, Victorian, and a lot of people do. Although I noticed that a lot of you have older houses, so maybe you've got cavity walls and that's easier to do. But if you are in need of insulation on the inside or the outside, which even if you have cavity walls, sometimes they're hard to treat for some reason. They might be narrow or difficult, and then you might need to do solid wall insulation after all. So this is one of your options, internal insulation. It's pretty messy and disruptive and painful to do, but it is really worth it. I speak from experience. One of the issues, particularly with internal insulation, is, it takes up some space. Quite often we end up putting in something like 100 millimeters of insulation. And if that's on 2 walls of your room, because of course it's only the outside walls, that can still take up quite a lot of space. So one of the issues is how thick does it need to be? And of course, partly that depends on what material you've decided to use, and partly it's to do with your ambition for how much you want to reduce your heat loss. So the left-hand chart shows you the performance of various different kinds of insulation. So on the left, we have the most efficient aerogel, and then you can see that, we're all equivalent to sort of 50 millimeters of PIR type thing. It's not just PIR, but that's the sort of thing you're talking at. And that's pretty much the standard, I think, still the case for internal insulation. Polystyrene is another plastic one, which is much cheaper, but not as efficient. And then you're getting into the fibers and the organic materials. And generally you need to be thicker to achieve the same level of heat reduction. So that's one issue. But then of course, how thick does it really need to be? If you think you haven't got room for the full thickness that you might be recommended, I would say don't just give up there and then, because it really is a case of diminishing returns. And your first 50 millimeters is worth a lot more than your second 50 millimeters. And you can see from this chart on the right, the sort of thing we're talking about. So, doubling the thickness might halve the heat loss, but if you're starting from you've already done a lot of improvement, then there's not that much more to go. So the only other thing to point out is that once you've put in some insulation, you can't necessarily just add another layer on the top. You might need to strip it out and start again. So you do need to think carefully about how much you're going to do. If you don't want to do it internally, you can also do it externally. This is, again, if you haven't got cavity walls that you can do inside the walls, which is an easy way of doing it. Not always recommended depending on the weather conditions and the house. External is much more common these days, I think. And it is less disruptive because you don't have to sort of vacate large parts of your house to do it. But it is also quite fiddly, and it can be done better or worse. These pictures show work being done on a house here. This was the original layout, and actually we're adding an extension here, which is another nice thing. If you're doing other work at the same time, it can be easier if you do your low carbon retrofit at the same time, because you've got the bulbs on site already. So as part of this retrofit, which is adding this extension here, they also put in external insulation, and they needed to extend the eaves. This is one of the things that has to be done. Whoops. So here you can see it before, you can see the guttering above there, and then in the middle picture you can see they've extended the eaves to cover the insulation that will be there, and then in the third one you can see it with the insulation. And the other interesting thing about this picture is that even though it's on the outside, you can still have trouble with the thickness, because with this window here, if you had very thick insulation, you might find it going in front of the window. You see what I mean? So those kinds of things, all these little details, you need to sort of look into how on earth they're going to be handled. It's never as easy as you think, unfortunately. And then at the end of it, it looks great. And by the way, even if you're in a terraced house, don't think you can't do insulation, because you probably can. There's a mix of things here. This is the back of a terrace, which has been insulated with it, and the next door hasn't got it. And it looks a bit funny, but maybe they'll get around to it at some point. You do need planning permission to do external insulation, at least most of the time. Occasionally you don't. And it is also fine to do, like external in the back and internal at the front, depending on what kind of features you want to preserve, or whether you can get permission or not. So that is possible. So that's about insulation and mainly walls, but of course you can also consider lofts and floors. Floors are less important, although drafts can be a problem there. But heating systems is also another really important issue. Peter and Meg put in hot water heating using solar panels, which is part of the heating, but it only really works in the summer. And they had a thermal store, so they could use that for the underfloor heating, as well as for the for the hot water through the taps, which you can also do. But if you want to have all-round heat that's decarbonised, then you really need to go for electrical. And if you're going for electrical, it can be very, very expensive unless you go for a super, super, super efficient system like a heat pump, which is amazingly not merely 100% efficient, but 300% or 400%, or even better sometimes, depending on the situation, but it is highly variable. So a heat pump looks like an air conditioning system, as you can see on the right there. That's the external unit. This is an air source heat pump. You can also have ground source and other options. So there's all sorts of things you can consider. And it works a bit like your fridge. In fact, it is exactly the same as your fridge. The principle is the same. With your fridge, you use electricity to pump heat out of the fridge into the kitchen or wherever it is, which is going from cold to hot. It's not the way heat normally flows, so you have to push it with some electricity, but it is nonetheless very, very efficient. And that way, it's not only cheaper to run than ordinary electricity would be, but it's also more less carbon emissions. It isn't very good at providing very heavy bursts of heat, which is why this retrofit also includes a hot water cylinder. So if you're used to a combi boiler, you'll find that you'll need to have a hot water tank fitted as well. It may not be maybe a small one or a big one, depending on your needs. And also, it generally works more efficiently when it's not got to work so hard, when it's not got such a big temperature difference to push against. So if you think about it, in the winter time, it might be 0 degrees outside, and your boiler currently supplies heat around your radiators at about 70 degrees. That's a really big temperature difference. And a heat pump, well, you can get them that will do that, but they're not as efficient. In order to prepare for doing something, for going through a heat pump, it's really helpful to insulate your house very effectively, and also consider putting in underfloor heating, which can operate at a much lower temperature than the gas radiators. You can actually run your radiators at a lower temperature, but they either need to be bigger or you need to give them a bit of a boost, like with a fan or something. There are various options there. So that's something to consider, and it really doesn't take a bit of planning and thought in advance. I mentioned ventilation. Drafts, bad, because they're uncontrolled, and quite often they are a massive heat loss, they can be. But you do need ventilation of some description. So the default with a new house, what we're all used to having trickle vents on our windows and extractors probably in our toilets and bathrooms sort of situation. And that's examples of passive ventilation, which is just relying on natural airflow through the trickle vents, and mechanical ventilation, which is being shoved through with the extractors. So that's two options, but there are all sorts of other issues you can do. So you can have it just, you know, ventilating all the time, or you can have it demand controlled. So you can have it triggered on a humidity sensor, for example. That's very helpful, because when the kind of things that require the generate a need for ventilation also generate water vapor, like cooking and showering and our breathing as well. You can have the mechanical passive. You can have it with or without heat recovery. Of course, the trickle vents and the mechanical ventilation with the extractors and not without heat recovery. But if you put in a heat recovery unit, then you're using the warm air from inside the room is used to heat up the air coming in. And that, you know, if you have a whole house ducted system, that can be really quite efficient. Like 90% of the heat can be recovered, which sounds like, you know, a good thing, which it is. Does take a bit of power to run the mechanical systems. You can have them passive as well. And usually heat recovery systems have filters, which is absolutely great if, like me, you live on a main road, or if you have problems with asthma or something. Actually, that can be quite helpful. So it's an interesting one for the point of view of air quality. And then one more sort of technical page. This is a graph which I was told was far too difficult to explain. If you want to make your house net zero, then you can at least get close to it by a package of measures. If you concentrate on your insulation and put in a heat pump, and if you have a PV panels or something like that, you should be able to get net zero over the year, although it's really tough to do it day by day, so you can tell from this graph. So the graph is showing day by day electricity consumed and generated from your PV panels through the year. And the yellow, which is below the line because it's reducing your demand, is your PV panels, and your net demand is the green. And the yellow is sort of very weather dependent, and of course you get much more power from your PV panels in the summertime. So that's why you get more yellow in the summer months. And then the orange is your appliances use. I've set this to a fairly typical sort of level. And you may be abstemious, or maybe you're not. It all depends on how you run your system, but certainly you can do stuff to reduce your energy consumption there as well, maybe. And then the blue is your hot water heating, which I've said is the same all the year round, and the red is your space heating, so your radiators and what have you, and that is of course weather dependent again. So you can see that increases your demand a lot in the winter months. In this example, I have assumed that you have put lots of insulation on your home, and you are using a super duper efficient heat pump, which is 400% efficient. And with that, you can just about probably get to net zero. So it is doable if you go for it. This graph shows some examples from Open Eco Homes houses. Tom was talking about the Open Eco Homes program. We've been running it for goodness knows quite a lot of years now. And here are just some of the examples of the houses that we do, we've had over the years. So this is showing their before and after heating energy consumption. This is the energy consumption we're looking at. And notice that it's per square metre per year, because that's a good way of comparing homes you know, you might have a big house or a little house, and obviously if it's a big house, then you're going to use more energy. So this is looking at the actual energy consumption. Blue is before, red is after. Some of them have made a whopping difference, some of them have made less. It's highly variable depending on what you do. Sometimes there's a big improvement, and it's partly due to behavioural changes as well. You know, you can go through enormous hassle to put in insulation and new heating systems, but if you just turn your thermostat down a little bit, that can make a big difference too. Or change the timing so it only heats for part of the day. It's really difficult to model. This one doesn't show, but its charts only show the actual savings. It's very hard to predict what savings you're going to get because it depends on what you've got to start with, and the surveys are reasonable, but there's only so much. I mean, they don't sort of model all the defects as well. It's very hard to do that. And also, quite often when you have improved your house, you have what we call the rebound effect, whereby you find you take some of your savings as extra comfort. And sometimes that may not even be intentional, but that's just what happens, which is very, very nice because, you know, we do like to be comfortable in our houses, and that's quite an important benefit. This chart shows some of the, you know, the impacts of the insulation on sort of temperature profile through the day on a winter's day. And you can see that with the orange line, although we're still losing heat overnight, we're not losing as much heat overnight. And we have actually taken some rebound effect here as well. I can see that because they're heating in the early afternoon when they didn't before, so that's an extra little bit. But even so, they're using less energy than it were. I'll tell you they are. And the impact is that the house is more even in temperature, which is much more comfortable to live with. And I'm coming up to the end of my thing. I think I've gone super duper quick. Hope, Tom, you're not cross with that. This is, we discussed a whole range of things you can do. We talked about insulation. Actually, we didn't talk about new windows, but obviously if you haven't got double glazing, you can put that in. And if you have got double glazing, you can consider improving it. We talked about putting in a heat pump to decarbonise your heating completely, because the heat pump is electricity driven, and electricity can be zero carbon, especially if you have PV panels. And you can also, rather than that, you could just upgrade your boiler. If it was a very inefficient one before, you could get substantial savings from that, because you should be able to, a modern condensing boiler should be 90% efficient at least. Air tightness is really important, but if you're considering air tightness, you also need to consider ventilation. And depending on what you're trying to achieve, you can look at it in different ways. So I think at this point, we were going to have a poll and ask you what are your priorities and motivations, and what you think you might be interested in doing.
It's just one question, so perhaps you could tick your top 3 motivations.
From the chat discussion that there's been quite a few comments as we went along, which is great. Yeah, air-to-air heat pumps is another option, and it's much easier to put in one room at a time, as Anne says. You might not get the renewable heat incentive for it, but I don't think we're going to get the renewable heat incentive anymore anyway, so that doesn't make any difference.
When we come in on the air-to-air thing, we decided not to bother about the renewable heat incentive, because one of the things we realised is that the renewable heat incentive payment depends on how much energy you use, and because we plan not to use much energy at all, the renewable heat payments would actually be bugger all. And so the cost is just a small 2.5 kilowatt unit that does one room, but it costs 2.5K, whereas a full air to water system would probably be 10K and a lot more disruptive, and a ground source one might have been 30K. So we went with the little air-to-air one, and it's been great so far.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just going to stop this poll now and share the results. And so, well, it's very appropriate that the biggest motivation is saving carbon. That's Cambridge Carbon Footprint's beef. And but okay, making your home more comfortable too.
So on the chat,
one of the questions that was on the chat was, I think, about Peter's place and whether he had insulated between the floors. And I guess in general, you know, is it a good idea to insulate between the floors when one's doing a retrofit? I don't know if any of the panel would like to comment on that.
Well, we did it, but it's not just for the heating. I don't think it makes that much difference from the point of view of heat transmission, except in particular cases where you've got a particularly warm house. I think it might be helpful from the point of view of sound as well, but I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that was really worthwhile.
But useful if you're only heating part of your house. So you know, maybe you only use the attic room when you've got visitors, and so the rest of the time you want to insulate under that floor.
Absolutely.
So there was another question about using underfloor. Why you use underfloor heating and the impact that has on efficiency. Nicola, do you want to make any comment about that?
Well, it's simply because you want to run your, running your radiators at high temperature only works because they're small, and if you have running it at a lower temperature, you need a larger area. So you can either have big radiators, or you can have fan-assisted radiators, or you can have a really big area, which is your underfloor. And you should be able to run your underfloor heating as low as 35 or 40 degrees. So that's a really huge difference from the 70 that you might be running your normal radiators on. And it makes the heat pumps much more efficient. There were other comments about efficiency saying that ground source heat pumps are more efficient, which is generally true because the ground doesn't get that cold in the wintertime. It shouldn't do anyway. If the system is badly sized, then you can get freezing, but that should not happen. The ground does slowly replenish the heat that you've taken out, and it's important that you size it so you're not taking heat out faster than you're putting it in. You don't have to have a large area. Quite a few of the houses in the Cambridge area have had borehole ground source heat pumps, which go very deeply straight down, rather than going wiggle, wiggle, wiggle under your garden, which is more common. You can have them just going straight down with a borehole, but we are talking serious depths here. We're talking like 60 meters or so, or even 100 meters, if you can get that far.
And considerable expense.
I don't know how much more expensive it is really, because you have to get the equipment in, but once you've got the equipment.
Nicola, I can tell you that I was literally laughed at by a supplier when I asked what would it cost to have a ground source heat pump put here in our terrace house in Newnham, and the answer was basically about 30k.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently from another neighbour of mine, the reason for this is that though in theory drilling a hole ought to be fairly easy, even though it's 60 meters deep, they have to use the sort of kit that they would normally use for drilling an oil well, or that sort of thing. So it's a massive bit of kit. And
if you hit green sand, you've got to do, instead of one borehole, you probably got to do 4.
Okay, so can we head for another question? Or
one more question about double glazed windows, whether they should be gas filled or triple glazed, or any thoughts about that? Nicola?
Well, you will get a higher efficiency with the gas fill. Some people say that it doesn't last very long; it leaks out. But I don't know. I don't have any good evidence of that. Does anybody else have evidence on that?
so I think when the seals go on a double glazing unit, then moisture gets in, and then you start to see condensation, and so it's kind of a bit evident when the seal's broken, isn't it?
Yes, if you've got water vapour coming in, it's extremely obvious. And of course, we haven't discussed secondary glazing either. That's also an option. I used to be dead against secondary glazing because I had some bad experiences with it. But I have seen some beautiful systems now. And, systems that are designed so that you can get in and clean the other glass without completely dismantling the system. You can open the other window, okay, and look very nice as well. So that is an option, certainly in some cases, if you don't want to have proper double glazing in for some reason.
Well, another question is about the impact on sound and insulation, and maybe I'll comment. So personally, we put Velux had a loft extension, and we put triple glazed Velux in the roof, and I'm really glad we did, because they only cost about 100 quid extra, which on largest Velux was a very small difference in the price. But they're much quieter, so when the rain pounds down, it's noticeably quieter than it would have been with just the other Veluxes we've got elsewhere in the house, which are just double glazed. So I would say, go for triple glazed if you possibly can. And the only thing is, sometimes if you need to have a proper sash window to satisfy the planners or conservation reasons, then sometimes it's a bit tricky to get triple glazed in. But green building stores do some triple glazed ones.
Yeah.
But somebody asked what the vision's like. Well, I mean, you just wouldn't know that it wasn't vision like through a triple glazed unit. But I mean, you just wouldn't know. It just looks the same. Depends how often you clean the window, but then that's the same if it's double or triple glazed.
I wouldn't try to do photography through it, but then I wouldn't try to do that through double glazing either. Yeah, somebody's saying here that thin double glazing units for old sash windows leak. I think old sash windows leak as well.
Green Building Store is now doing double and triple glazed sash windows. Some are mock sash and some are actually functioning old-fashioned sash windows that are double or triple glazed.
And they can all be done absolutely custom. I mean, they're custom made, so
yes,
you don't have to redo your window opening. Whatever your window opening is, they'll make it. And I think they're, roughly speaking, sort of £1,000 a go. Is that right, Margaret? I can't quite remember.
Something like that. You send in rough measurements and an elevation. They'll send you a working quote, and then whoever's installing then remeasures and fine tunes the order. And it's, but you can plan on it. It's months ahead by doing an initial quote.
And there's still quite a lot of interest in what sort of heating system should one use. And there's this choice between, should one put in a good combi, or should one put in heat pumps, and if so, what sort? And what's happening to the carbon intensity of the electricity supply? Are heat pumps, is going electric now worth it, whereas some years ago it probably wasn't? Any comments?
In terms of the carbon, it definitely is worth it. In terms of the actual cost, however, electricity is 4 or 5 times the price of gas, so it's
for the kit,
not going to make get much benefit from that.
The important thing is to get the heat loss of your house down, so your demand is low, and that would normally be done first. And then you may have to enlarge all of your radiators if the heat pump isn't producing enough. So it is complicated.
There's a huge amount of controversy and discussion about whether we should be going for heat pumps and pure electric systems, or whether we should go for low carbon gas. And I think, like with most of these issues, it's not a case of either or. We are going to need both. But I would say that if you can easily, within reason, reasonably easily go to electric, that is your better option. But there may be more options in the future, including hybrid systems, or more hybrid systems, whereby you have a heat pump for most of the time and a top up from the gas when it's really bad, when it's really cold and the demand is such that the grid can't handle it. So I don't think there's any reason not to install a heat pump now if you sensibly can. But if you can't, if you think it's going to be too much of difficulty, there may be more options in the future.
So over to you, Margaret.
Okay, so I'm Margaret Reynolds, low energy architect, and we've had a quite complex discussion now, but I'm going to go back to what we said we were going to do, which is a beginner's guide to retrofit. And I would like to suggest ways of organizing your thinking about your particular house. So we're considering energy usage, floor area, costs. And after that, we'll talk a bit about how to decide what to do on your house, which retrofit measure, as we call them. And the objective here is really to obtain a whole house plan, so you know where you're going. Some of these issues are particularly good to address now during the lockdown, when you are taking a very deep, long look at your home. You'll find it useful to be able to compare your energy usage with other houses. And to do this, we use a rate, kilowatt hours per meter squared of floor area per year. You can compare your usage in different years. You can compare your usage with other houses in the UK and abroad. And if you know where you stand, you can set a target for the future. If you have a gas boiler, your gas usage will typically cover the what we call space heating in your house and the hot water provision. So here's a gas meter, a gas bill. On the bill, the number of units you've used per month or quarter is shown in kilowatt hours. You might already be reading your meter in cubic feet and sending it to your provider. It is really useful to have this information in kilowatt hours logged on a spreadsheet by month and year. We need to see the pattern of use over all the seasons of a year. It's a bit like Nicola's chart where when you have PVs. Here's a spreadsheet. I've highlighted the entries for total gas usage per year. I've also highlighted the area of the house. So let's see how you can easily get that figure. The useful document to have is the Energy Performance Certificate for your house. This gives you a current estimate of energy costs for your house, and it estimates the floor area, as you can see highlighted there. It also suggests some basic ways to lower your energy usage. You're only likely to have an EPC if you've bought or sold your property since this became a requirement in 2007. An EPC costs less than £100. There's some local providers here, and I'm sure there are more. It's something useful to consider. A measured plan of each floor of your house in meters will be needed if you're considering extending your property. Note at this point, we're only interested in the parts of your house that are heated, because we're looking at the energy use. In a rectilinear house, you could do a measured plan yourself by measuring all the floor space between the outside walls. A drawn-up survey of your house, and these days these are done by laser, which is amazingly quick and accurate, could cost in the region of £450 to £600. This might help you plan and could be handed to a designer. So with your space heating and hot water usage in kilowatt hours for a full 12 months and the floor area of your house, you can establish this rate, kilowatt hours per meter squared per year, at least approximately. As we said earlier, you can now think about a target for lowering that rate, and you can compare with other houses in the UK. The average UK house uses about 100 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year, and that shows on the graph earlier of results of the Open Eco homes. Many of them started way above 100 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year, and some have got significantly below that. Another useful set of information on your house could come from an air tightness test. These are available locally for about £150. This test tells you how much of this precious energy, which you've actually already paid for, is seeping out of your house to warm the great outdoors. It also shows you where the leaks are. Some leaks you may be able to put right yourself. Knowing the air tightness of your house is an important element of planning your retrofit. If your house is fairly airtight, you may want to look at controlled ventilation systems anyway, and especially if you're making it more airtight. Or you may need to budget to tackle leakage if your house is very leaky, and then look at ventilation control. So it's an important, a very useful thing to have early on. Establishing a budget. So what does a reasonable budget look like for your proposed work? do you have a budget figure in mind? Is it fixed? Do you need a financial return? So perhaps you're creating an extra room in the house that you could rent to a lodger. Where's the money coming from? How many meters squared of this house that you've measured do you want to retrofit? Can you get a budget, pounds per meter squared, for these areas? Is this all part of an extension program? Say a loft conversion. Could the work be phased? So here's some examples of phasing. You might want new bathroom and kitchen. You do those first, the wet rooms first, and then you move to the living rooms, the bedrooms. Or you might do the inside first, and then end up with the external wall insulation. Or you might do the extension and loft conversion first, decant things into those new rooms, and then do the remainder of the house. These are all strategies to start thinking about for your whole house plan. Another question, how are you going to procure this work? How can you cope with the disruption that's involved in, say, underfloor heating, where you lose the room for a couple of weeks minimum? Are you going to do a big job, which is probably more efficient and cheaper per square meter, but it's a huge disruption? You might want to limit the scope of the different jobs so that you're limiting the risk of each one. Are you going to do it DIY or get builders and professionals in? Another thing that can help is to get specific quotes for some of the works. So supply and install for an air source heat pump, solar photovoltaic panels, new windows, external wall insulation. These are all figures that can help you get a sense of what's affordable. Which retrofit measures, as we call them, make sense for your house and your life? We can look at 5 different categories here. So there's insulation, and we've gone through a lot of it: roof and loft, walls, windows and doors, floor. And there are a lot of questions about each one, pros and cons for each one. Air tightness. Is that one of your targets, to be more comfortable, have less drafts, and be more efficient in the heating and the ventilating? And if you are going to make it more airtight, you must consider better ventilation, because you're changing the behavior of your house, and you could trigger condensation if you're not careful. Another big group is the services. So that's heating. So you might be changing your boiler or the flue gas recovery on your boiler. A new heating system, a means of storing the heat. Ventilation, as Nicola mentioned earlier, you can have intermittent, passive, decentralized, centralized. It may be that you want to do this piecemeal, or you might want to have the whole system done at once. Heat sources, so that would be radiators, heat pump, biomass, combined heat and power. There are various things to consider there. Renewables, solar thermal, solar photovoltaics can include a diverter to heat your hot water. They can also, the electricity can be stored in a battery. And of course, then the whole question of electric vehicles and things. And then finally, a simple measure is simply more efficient lighting and appliances. Now, it's interesting to say, and we really want to just touch on this, the government is establishing standards for retrofit. It's called PASS 2035, PASS standing for Publicly Available Specification. And this, what's important here is, for our discussion today, is that this includes a new role, which is a retrofit coordinator. Okay, so a retrofit coordinator sits down at the outset with householders to determine the intended outcomes. And these, and to assess the risk involved in each of these measures or combination of measures. And that's frequently quite important, that different measures interact with each other, so that your air tightness requires ventilation, etc. So you might not use a retrofit coordinator, but the list of the goals mentioned in PASS 2035 makes a useful checklist. So here are some broad categories. Energy. So lowering the energy use, lowering the energy costs, tackling fuel poverty, or lowering the emissions. Second category, comfort. So you want to improve the internal comfort, you want to improve the indoor air quality. Perhaps you want to reduce overheating, which is an increasing problem. Remedial works. So are you needing maintenance? Perhaps you already have condensation. You might have leaks from gutters or flashings, or maybe the drafts around your windows or whatever in your floor are causing a problem. So some of this can be almost justified in terms of putting things right and at the same time doing energy efficient work. And then finally, other works. So an extension, a loft conversion, a general upgrade in the property adds to its value almost usually. I mean, I don't know what house values are doing at the moment, but that is often a reason why people say, well, I'm doing that, but I want to do it to a low carbon standard, and I also want to then bring up the rest of the house. Okay, so how are you going to do this? It's always useful to remember that building works incorporate a balance of cost, quality, and time. With care, you may be able to achieve 2 of these, but almost never all 3. So if you want good quality work at a reasonable price, you'll probably have to accept that it's going to take a long time. If you have a deadline by Christmas, say, or before a new baby, you'll probably have to pay over the odds for good quality work. If you're looking for fast and cheap, you'll get the quality you pay for. Quality. These are some slides from the Carbon Co-op. Unfortunately, there are many examples of poor quality on retrofit works, often because of a failure to plan ahead or to think of the impact of one single measure considered by itself on the whole building. So on the left, we see external wall insulation applied to a street facade, but it's left off to expose this, this lovely stone lintel, creating what we would call a cold bridge, which transmits the cold right around all the external wall insulation directly through to the interior. On the right is more external wall insulation. This time it's stopping short of an ornate eaves detail with a plastic cover strip, which is the white line. Again, this creates a cold bridge above the white plastic line. The cover strip in this position, apart from looking rather odd, creates a danger that rainwater could splash up and get behind the new external wall insulation. Roof eaves need to be extended, as Nicholas showed in that earlier slide, beyond, further out to cover the top of the new external wall insulation. In this case, the eaves decoration could have been removed and repositioned on an extended eave, but of course this would have been a longer and more expensive job. So how are you going to procure the work? Can you put together a whole house plan, possibly with a retrofit coordinator used, for the full job or just sparingly? Could you do any of the work yourself? Can you be the coordinator of different specialists? For contractors, there's some excellent contractors who are keenly interested in low energy retrofit. There are not many, but they are there. As a charity, we can't promote them, but we can document what they've done and for whom, so you can make your own judgment. Open Eco Homes posts online a full 2-page case study information sheet about all the homes that have been toured in the past 10 years. And this is 68 houses in total now. This gives the aims, the before and after results, the products, the materials, the builders, and as people were asking earlier, the cost of these different jobs, sometimes in phases. So I do encourage you to make use of this. Tom is now going to wrap up our session. So thank you. And I'll deal with questions later on.
Yeah, no, well, we're going to question and answer next, I think, Margaret. Thanks for that. And so yeah, so we're in good time again. So I hope we can have a further good question and answer session, and maybe some further discussion. I'd like to hear directly from other participants. But do you want to help us first, Anne, and point out something?
Okay, so there was one question that was going on, which was about sort of in parallel.
Anne,
Yes?
your audio isn't good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Now.
now. You got to be
Closer,
close.
maybe. Put your head closer.
Yeah, it's odd. I don't quite know what's going on.
That's good. That's good now.
That's good.
Okay. Yeah, there was one question and discussion that was going on, which was about storage and you know, electricity storage, tariffs, variable tariffs, and also thermal storage. And I think Henry had some quite interesting stuff to say. So I'm just going to try and unmute Henry, if that's okay, Henry.
Yeah, hi. It's just a very quick comment. Hopefully you can hear me. I was just pointing out that in response to something right at the end of previous session with Nicola, I think, about the options for we're talking about the cost comparisons between gas and electric heating. Obviously, you've got the coefficient performance of the heat pump to factor in, but it's worth being aware of variable rate tariffs and that are much more. There are many more options now than the old sort of Economy 7, which is the one most people know well. And when paired up with either a flexible lifestyle of using electricity, not using it when it's at the peak points, or with some kind of storage, either hot water or battery-based approach, can give you an additional factor in cost favor of electricity, basically, which when you add to or multiply rather to the coefficient of performance of a heat pump, could actually over the space of the year come out on sort of economically on top of cheaper rather than the gas option, notwithstanding the costs of installing equipment and amortizing that cost over time. I haven't done the numbers on that side of things.
Margaret's keen to comment.
I was just going to say, if you're looking at storage of electricity, you are going to do photovoltaics, adding a diverter to take any extra electricity to heat your own hot water is a matter of, well, mine was about 220 pounds, and it didn't take an expert to do it. The instructions were intelligible to a straight electrician. That way you are storing your spare electricity as heat, and that's a very relatively inexpensive way to do it. Obviously batteries, they're in such flux now. I don't at the moment have clients who are have bought batteries. I do know people who have, but they're waiting because the technology is changing. So, but that goes with photovoltaic panels too. And you can, with a smart meter, get systems, and the one that's been mentioned to me is Octopus Agile, which are totally renewable and which will give you a payment if you have spare electricity that they can use. They'll pay you for it at certain times of day when there's peak demand.
Yeah, another question that people are interested in is how do you find a retrofit coordinator? I mean, or even if they're not officially yet named that, somebody to help with a very complex job.
I can give you a bit more information on that. There is one person I know in Cambridgeshire who is currently training to be a retrofit coordinator, and he expects to be finished sort of by autumn, obviously COVID-19 depending, and more are training. It is something that's worth knowing about. How many there will be and what they'll charge, I couldn't say, but it might be worth, if you want to do a large, an overall scheme for your house, getting one for one session to go through what you think you want to do and comment on it. I don't really know. Some architects will probably be taking this on too. I intend to, but it's all new. Some housing associations and now government programs will be requiring past 2035 retrofit coordinator involvement from January 2021, as I understand it, but it's an optional thing. And the Retrofit Academy should have a list of local ones, and I checked, and there is only this one person so far in Cambridgeshire. There are probably more in London. It's something that's developing, but something to be aware of.
Yeah. I think I'm inclined to unmute everybody and see if anybody has got any points they would like to ask. Is that okay, do you think, Tom?
Let's try it.
Okay, we'll try it. Unmute all, see what happens.
I see what time it is. We got lots of time.
Yeah, so would anybody like to ask anything?
Who is the person?
Put your hand up. Yeah.
Who is the person?
Who is what
talking about?
person? No, she said anybody.
Would anybody like to ask a question? You're all unmuted.
I would like to ask a question before anyone else chips in. Margaret, can you comment about the carbon cost of manufacturing the new equipment and building materials versus the benefit over the lifetime of the product? I know this is pretty pertinent to lots of.
It's a very serious question, and there's a terrible time lag in that the people who are considering that are not rewarded for doing that, if you like. They're making there's certain solutions that people are tending to do now to lower their own personal usage as operational usage, but the carbon and the embodied carbon of these measures, there are standards for the different equipment. You can undertake this yourself. You can ask a professional to do that. But it's taking a long time for the industry to begin to cope with that. I'll probably try to write a note on the standards that you can look for. There's about 7,000 construction elements and components that do post a standard, and you can choose those. Whether your builder will know anything about it is another question. We're doing pretty well to get three or four builders locally who take all this seriously from an operational energy point of view. So yes, absolutely important, but still, coming.
It is important, but I would say don't worry about it too much. When I last looked at it, for example, using PIR insulation or something, which is a plastic, it's made from fossil fuels, and people worry about the carbon involved in that. It was paying back its carbon in a matter of a few months. I mean, a year, and that's it. So that wouldn't have been an issue. The high carbon materials tend to be steel and anything involving ceramics, the new build. Those are really high carbon materials.
And concrete, yeah.
And concrete massively, yes. Although not so much hempcrete, because there were some questions about hempcrete earlier on. Really interesting material. It's made with natural fibre and lime mortar, which has a much better carbon balance than conventional mortar. I can't remember the details. Not particularly easy to work with, but it produces a really nice finish. And you can kind of use it as an insulation material or as a construction material as well. Oh, sorry, Margaret, yeah.
I've been discussing that with a client and was warned by colleagues that although you may be willing and the hempcrete installer may be willing, your insurer might say, what's this stuff? We don't want any of it. So the construction industry broadly operates by looking in the rear view mirror. If it hasn't been used, they're very suspicious of it. So, and not to say don't look at it, it's really important and we want to encourage it. And there are these standards now emerging. And if you are in a position of doing reputational work, say for a business, and you want to say, we are going to create a sustainable new building or renovation, and this is the way we're doing it, and here's what we're doing about carbon, embodied carbon, that could well make a difference. People might be quite, impressed by that in a reputational sort of way. For a householder, it's a personal satisfaction and something to look for the future proofing, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
So we've got about 5 minutes more possible for question and answers. Does anyone else? Sue, you need to be unmuted if you're going to ask one.
I could just go inside
I
a track on the retrofit industry if you wanted.
Oh, sorry, was someone else talking?
Yeah.
Retrofit industry, who's that? I can't see everybody.
Yeah, I'm a retrofit assessor. So that's basically a posh EPC guy. My boss is now a retrofit coordinator. We're one of the first companies to get onto this. Most people were waiting to do their training, and of course, there's no face-to-face training available at the moment. Of all of the 4 or 5 different accreditation bodies, only one of them has actually come on stream with the retrofit. So there's a company we're having to move over to that. The body's called ECMK. I'll pop the web address on the chat if you want. They have got a page there. It's largely for tradesmen, but there's a page there for homeowners, which will have more stuff on it soon. And they're going to be the only people who can put PAS 2035 work through at the moment.
Well, there's the Retrofit Academy. They're training retrofit coordinators.
Yeah,
and I believe they are teaching for Stroma and other
yeah, but Stroma and Elmhurst
well.
haven't had their accreditation done yet. I've had to move
it's
from
all
Elmhurst.
early days, yeah.
Very
And
early,
the
yeah.
AECB, that's the Association for Energy Conscious Building, has an excellent carbon light retrofit online course, which costs about 400 quid, which it is intended for builders and designers and professionals, but the clients also take it. And onto that, they are adding a retrofit coordinator course sometime. They said by January, it's all, and whatever was being planned in February is now knocked completely into the long grass. So, we don't know what's happening. Yeah. I'm hoping that some people will get it together to do this kind of thing online. The AECB Carbon Light course, I really highly recommend, and it's online and it's cheap. And it's a great thing to do if you're stuck at home. And I hope their retrofit coordinator course will be as good, but many people have suddenly got childcare or, all kinds of issues that they, just can't get on with it. So
thanks.
Watch this space, I think.
Thanks. I can see your DL.
Dave.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Dave, for that input. And if you can put that thing about ECMK in the chat, that would be great. So I think we've got time for.
Can I just ask? Are you a local?
Lee, is that?
Are you a local energy assessor? Yeah.
I work nationally, but our firm fits nationally.
Okay.
And we're based in Merseyside actually, but we fit all over. My last job was in Devon.
Okay, we've just got time for one more question in this set. And Sue was going to ask something earlier. Can you go for it?
Okay, sorry, it's not going to be very useful as a question. I want to say a really big thank you to you all for doing this, just in case there's not another opportunity to do that. I just think it's amazing. And my only sort of question is, the chat, I was expecting the presentations to be useful, but this chat is really useful. I'm just wondering how we can kind of get all the information out of it. I'm sure it will be on the record, but it's kind of quite complicated. Can some kind of synthesis of it?
Well, can I say the chat will be saved, and so I'll give you a link shortly to where also this presentation is saved. I think you've been emailed that already. And so I shall try and to make the chat publicly available as well, so that you know, you can go back and look into it to see what's been said, remind yourself.
The other thing you can do if you're a sort of dab hand at cut and paste, if you basically just try scrolling with your cursor over all the text, all the chat from top to bottom, it will sort of kind of go blue. And then if you could do Control-C, and then you open a Word document and go Control-V, it will all magically appear in your Word document.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you, Anne. I was trying. I hadn't quite cracked it. Thank you.
So we will, Tom, I think we'll try to sort of do a rendition of the chat with some answers or some sources or something, or just the chat.
Maybe. Let's discuss.
We'll see.
We'll provide something there in the chat.
It's brilliant to have all these questions and all this knowledge, and we just need more of these forums where people can share this.
Okay, so I need to go towards finishing up now, and so this slide we've got up now is about questions to ask householders. If you were on an Open Eco Home tour, I'm afraid we're not having actual live tours of homes this year, as you probably heard, but we're planning to have virtual tours of homes, online tours with question and answers. And so here's some of the questions you might want to ask homeowners, or maybe you're already able to visit or talk to a friend who has already done retrofit. These are some of the questions you might want to ask. But also, I'll give you a link shortly to this Open Eco Home archive that Margaret mentioned, where there are all these case studies of homes that have previously been opened, and that you can answer quite a lot of those questions there, explore those. Okay, next slide, please. So we've got a few photos here just to show you some of the retrofitters in Open Eco Homes. And so in the top left, you can see Zoe and Samin on Ainsworth Street. They've just recently completed an architect-designed retrofit that looks really neat. That was open last year. Top right is my wife Anne, who's been helping with all the tech and the questions. And so this was celebrating us doing partway through our underfloor insulation. You can see this is our sitting room floor. We took up the floorboards, a DIY job, and we've got 200mm of mineral wool there, put in kind of netting material that it extends below the joists there, and then eventually we put back the floorboards, and it's a brilliant improvement. So we're doing our retrofit in a step-by-step mode. In the bottom right is Alex from Baudet Street. In fact, it was her house that you saw the hempcrete being applied, and here she's holding a bit of wood fibre insulation that I think she was using for some internal insulation somewhere. And on bottom left is Bart from his home in Whitwell Way in Coton. He has done a passive house standard extension, which is the nearest bit of his home, you see, the wooden bit. And then a really thorough retrofit of the rest of his 1945 semi. Quite a lot of DIY, including he did external insulation, external wall insulation himself, DIY, which was pretty impressive. He's a physicist, and he's being very thorough about how he's doing it. So those are some examples of the way some people are going to work on this. Next slide. Okay, so here is a slide with some links to resources. And so I've emailed you this set of slides as a PDF. And so you'll be able to click on these links in there. And so the first one is what we were talking about with the case studies. The second one from Cambridge Carbon Footprint there has a lot of other home energy resources, including some lists of a list of local suppliers and professionals. Centre for Sustainable Energy has some really good home energy advice sheets. Transition Cambridge has some great FAQs, further energy advice. And at the bottom, there's a link there. It's okay, that's all right, Margaret. There was a link. Oh, I see. Yes, you're slightly obscuring it.
Yes, it's covered. I can't get rid of it.
That's okay. People can click on that link. Let's go to the final slide. Thank you. Okay. And so, surprise, surprise. So I said at the top, Open Eco Homes is a project of Cambridge Carbon Footprint, our charity, and we welcome donations. You know, we're able to do this because people are making donations to us. I'm sure we get grants too, but it's a vital part of keeping us going. If you're able to go to that link and donate, and I'll put it in the chat too, that a link to that. And then what I'd like you to do before we finish would really help us to have this feedback to help us improve more webinars like this. So could you write in the feedback one thing that's been good about this evening's session for you, one thing that needs improving, and a suggestion. That would really help us if you're able to write those 3 things in chat before you leave. And my final question really is we thought, well, maybe some of you would like to have a discussion session on tonight's subjects. And so we're wondering if people would like this, then in a few weeks we will organize a simple Zoom meeting where we will discuss and chat, and we can maybe hear more of your experiences and share knowledge. And if you would like that, then please just write discuss in chat. Your name will come through with that. And then if there's enough interest, then we'll email you when details of when we're going to do that. So thanks very much. I've enjoyed this. I hope it's been useful to you. And so we're now sort of closing this session, but you don't have to leave. You're welcome to leave if you've. This is roughly when we're a tiny little bit before 9 o'clock, but we're finishing the presentation now. But we will also have maybe another 15 minutes for further questions or discussion, or you may want to share things with us. So thanks a lot.
There was one question somebody had asked, which I thought would be useful for me as well, was about the foundation.
So what do you need a concrete, you mean?
Yes.
Well, Victorians didn't use it much. I don't know what's the norm for these days. You can have sort of brick plinths and lay a structure over it, but it is very common to have a concrete base, isn't it? Margaret, can you help on this one?
Right. Whatever you do, you have to have building control approval. So if you've got a very imaginative, interested building control officer who can convince your builder to do some other form of footing or foundation, then great. But mostly people are going to go with what they know, which is concrete footings and then brickwork on top of that. The footings to spread the load and to work with the particular soil type. You know, this is not something you want to mess around with. You have to have a structural engineer look at it and do calculations to show that it's suitable. And whether you could use, well, people use blast furnace slag instead of some of the aggregate. There are ways of making concrete a bit more green. But substituting anything else, you'd have to find an adventurous structural engineer to do calculations that the building control officer would approve of.
So can I ask about the underfloor heating?
Yeah.
So if you have a solid concrete floor, how is that done? Does it mean digging up the floor?
We had a really good Transition Cambridge Energy Group meeting about this only last week.
Right.
And
so we looked at suspended floors.
No,
and
mine had a solid floor.
Yes. So there are a number of sort of approaches to this. If you already have a solid floor, and you realize if you change your floor level, you will have to rehang all your doors, and all of your joinery will be too short. And so that is a major thing. If you can get a millimeter thin electric heating pad in there, you might be able to put your flooring back on it. That's the cheapest way. Otherwise, it's break out the concrete, lay a new slab on top of, huge. A passive house insulation is 300 or 400 if you can afford to dig out that much. Slab on top of that, and then underfloor heating in the screed. And that's a good job. In terms of putting insulation into the suspended floor, the AECB, and they have really researched this very carefully, are very, very hesitant to agree that anyone should be putting massive amount of insulation around joists, because the joists are perishable. They're sitting in sockets in brickwork that you will no longer be able to see in any way once you've covered it all with insulation. So you need to keep the air bricks very clear. You need to have a very good sized void, which you may not have. There are some floors that are suspended where I would not do that. And the AECB generally says, take it out like you're breaking up your concrete slab and put in a solid floor, because that holds the heat and that you can really massively insulate. Obviously, Tom has done his floor. Our floor we did before I took the AECB course, and we have, playing field behind our house, and the wind comes at a very quick rate, and a 600 millimeter void, so I think we're probably okay. But the fact is, if you are encasing timber, which is a perishable organic material, in non-perishable insulation, you are taking a risk. Tom and Anne used mineral wool, which is much more breathable, much more moisture permeable, so that if it gets wet, it dries. But PIR, solid foam insulation, does not allow much air to dry around the sockets of your joists. So that's a caveat for doing underfloor heating. The fact is, it is lovely, comfortable, and it works with an air source heat pump, because your whole floor becomes a radiator and you're having low heat all over the room, which is, so there are lots and lots of reasons for doing it. It is expensive.
Can I say, if you follow the links to the Cambridge Carbon Footprint Energy Resources that was on that previous slide, you'll see there's we did a write-up of how we did our underfloor insulation as a DIY project. It would still be a useful thing to look at if you were going to get a professional to do it for you. We learned on the way.
Transition Cambridge has just had a session on underfloor heating, which is looking at what we did on my house. And another advantage is that you can make the top of the floor all the way up to behind the skirtings, up to the plaster, airtight. So it cuts down lots of drafts, and again, makes the room very comfortable. But so that, I think, Nicola, is going to be available online?
Sorry, I wasn't listening.
The underfloor heating session, the transition underfloor heating session?
I was thinking I might do that actually, because
okay.
it's a really, and we got some details on 3 different installations there, which are quite interesting. So yeah, I'll check with the people, but I don't think there'll be a problem with that.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
I have been told electric floor heating is not very reliable. Oh, interesting.
I've heard of it used, say, in a bathroom where you were changing the flooring and you just wanted to get the bathroom warm. It's probably not energy, in terms of carbon usage and things, it's not particularly good, but it does warm the room. If you had a heat pump, that would be probably okay.
And there's a comment here about lime mortar versus cement mortar. Margaret, that's one of your things as well.
Well, yeah, lime mortar is what you'll find on old buildings. It's very easy to clean off the bricks to reuse them. It is a natural material, and it cures as it sits there, so it's gradually strengthening itself. It's just like external render. And so yes, use it. I mean, if the same thing about the building industry, people have been using ferociously strong cement-based mortar for decades, and you've got to get someone to specify or insist on it, and get the builder to agree, and the building control officer to not, gang up on you. But yes, that's definitely better to use lime mortar, and particularly for repairing an old building where it's already got lime mortar.
Anyone else have things they'd like to say? Maybe tell us about your experience.
I've got one question, if that's okay.
Yes,
I've got a quarry tile hallway, which is very cold, and I'm not quite sure what's underneath it, whether it's just soil. It was built in the 1930s, late 30s, the house. What would you recommend with that? Could you dig it up and sort of dig it out and do something with it?
Quarry tiles were used like slate as a damp-proof course. So you probably have a solid slab there, and then the quarry tiles go right out to the edge, perhaps behind. Do you have skirtings? I don't know.
Well, in the hall there's a quarry tile skirting as well, so it's just
right. So that seems to be quite effective. So if you're going to change that, where that you've breached your damp-proof membrane in the horizontal sense, and the vertical tying up to your outside wall damp-proof course. And they don't. This is not a joke. A damp-proof course, if there's soil is wet, or even if it just rains or whatever, your walls absorb water, and it will go up as high as it can. You go into an old church or something, you'll see it. It goes right up in the spring to a visible level, and then it's all, and the plaster is all, there's efflorescence in it, and it's flaking off. That's what will happen if you breach your damp-proof course, and it will come up into your house, and you don't want that. So if you want that hall to be warm, you could, if you can cope with an increase of depth, which is very awkward, and it means that each threshold to every room has to be sorted out, you could just put a very slim line in there, but mostly I think you would have to break it out and put a damp-proof insulation, damp-proof membrane slab, and then screed, and you could put underfloor heating in the hall if you want to go to that expense. Most people don't heat the hall, but that would be the thorough way to do it. Otherwise, you could, as I say, put some kind of electrical pad or something under there, and then new flooring on top, but you're probably going to increase it at least an inch, which is going to make it very awkward for all the doors. You need to look at it carefully, and those are the kinds of things to consider.
We have a slightly related problem in that we have a wooden suspended floor, Victorian terraced house, nice polished boards, and clearly, there's a void underneath there, so that's, there's a half an inch of wood and then there's cold air. And I just couldn't face the idea of pulling up all these beautifully polished boards. But what we discovered was that, noticed that every metre and a half or so, a plumber had taken up a board. So actually there were some boards that were quite easy to get up. And we had these things called sleeper walls every 1.2 metres.
Yeah.
And I discovered that by taking up a board every 1.2 metres, usually one that the plumber or somebody had already taken up, I could then post bits of insulation in and basically stick them onto the underside of the floor with the sort of grab adhesive and add the sort of, effectively I made some sort of wooden staples to sort of then, you know, support it a bit more permanently in place. I didn't actually have to get down onto the floor, which is something I absolutely hate doing, because it was not a very nice space, it's not very big. But yeah, quite pleased with the result.
It's very important. Did you stick a tape measure to below the bottom of your joist to see how deep the void is?
Oh, it's 2 foot, something like that. I mean,
yeah,
I
good.
can
That
lie
sounds
down
very good. Some people's are so amazingly low that you can almost see plants growing in there. The other thing is you must find your air bricks and keep those clear. It's, you know, all you need is shrubbery or something, and it clogs with leaves very quickly. And you know, if you're going to do anything to your floor, and then just general house maintenance, you need air through there to keep your joists dry, so they can dry. And so that sounds fine. Our floor, before we did the underfloor heating, we had suspended, I guess it was mineral wool in netting, and that is perfectly valid. But if we're going to really low levels where you're airtight and massive amount of insulation, you're going to really start putting a lot of pressure on the timber to cope and to dry out with all that inert material blocking the air to it.
So I can see that.
Andy, you've got a question, I
yes.
think.
And the other thing is interesting is
Margaret.
Yeah.
Margaret, let's just hear from Debbie and Andy.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so we're very new to this, but we have a steel frame bungalow and we're interested in doing some wall insulation. Is it better to do internal wall insulation to make sure we don't damage the steel joists, or is it better to do external insulation on it? Or doesn't it matter?
You need to get a builder to look at it, but as a general rule, external is like putting a tea cozy or a cold insulating jacket or something, and on the outside of the house, so you're not messing around with the way the wall behaves. You're keeping the whole construction warm. So that's, generally speaking, the first thing to look at. If your house has beautiful brickwork and beautiful stonework and beautiful windows and things, a lot of people can't face that. If it's a 90s house, I don't wish to show any prejudice here, but you might well not mind covering up the outside. This, render is quite pleasant looking. You can even put brick slips on top to make plinths and things. It's kind of artificial, but heck, a lot of this is changing the way people conceived of houses, even in the 90s, unfortunately. And so that would be the first route I would look at. And you can ask a builder. I would look through our sheets and get some names. I shouldn't, I'm not promoting any.
Yeah.
And they would be likely to come around, be willing to come around if we ever get out of this pandemic, to just say, well, I think you could probably budget about this much. It's a piece of work. But you need to look at the roofs, and any good external wall installation builder would say, well, to extend your roofs, it's expensive. And if a good roofer doesn't want to just extend the eaves, he wants to retile the roof, because tiling's always set out from the bottom and works up, and so they don't want to add at the bottom and mess up the courses of the tiling. So, but to get a good job, you need new gutters and an extended eaves, and then you can cloak the whole house in this warm jacket.
Yeah, because with our steel frame, there's a lot of vents to try and make sure that the steel frame doesn't get any condensation and corrosion occurring. Yeah. So I noticed that we've got a lot of vents in not the eaves, but underneath. I don't know, it's not the soffits, but we have our roof comes out quite a lot, but underneath we've got a lot of air vents to make sure that everything stays dry.
to protect the timbers of your loft.
Oh no, it's steel. There's no timber.
Oh, it's all steel up there, right? So it's getting
Yeah.
ventilation up into the loft, normally speaking, because the hot air from your house, say from your shower, is going to go right up through the ceiling
Yeah.
and into your loft, and it will rust or
Yeah. Okay.
rot or whatever it can do as it condenses up there. So if you insulate at the loft level, and then you need to ventilate above it, and that's probably what the soffit vents are doing.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
So you're very right that you mustn't block those vents with
Yeah.
external wall insulation. So if you're going to cover up the whole soffit, you must get some more ventilation up in that roof.
Thank you.
So we're 9:15 now, which is when we had planned to finish this bit as well. Yeah, unless anyone is bursting to say something else. Any final comments? Well, I hope it's been good, and we will hopefully make this available to you. And you've seen the link, I believe. If you follow the link, you will be able to catch a lot of this later.
We do hope to continue this if people are interested, and to go into more depth if that's of interest.
And we'd asked you when you booked about what other kinds of webinars you might be interested in attending. And so thanks for that information, and that will help us plan some more sessions like this on other topics. Thanks very much. So good night all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye. Stay safe.